The easiest mistake a person can make is believing they already know the truth before the facts have even arrived. On a cool autumn morning just outside Alexandria, Virginia, the first rays of sunlight stretched across Interstate 495, painting the highway in soft shades of gold, while thousands of commuters made their way toward Washington, District of Columbia. The steady rhythm of engines blended with the distant hum of the city waking for another busy weekday. Officer Ryan Mitchell guided his patrol vehicle through moderate traffic with the quiet confidence that came from nearly 15 years in uniform. Earlier that morning, dispatch had issued a regional alert involving a black luxury sport utility vehicle believed to be connected to an ongoing investigation into a reported vehicle theft. The description was brief, incomplete, and still awaiting several database updates. Yet Ryan had already convinced himself that experience would help him recognize the right vehicle before the system ever could. Several miles ahead, a black luxury sport utility vehicle appeared in the center lane, moving calmly with the flow of traffic. Sunlight reflected across its polished surface as it passed beneath an overpass before continuing toward the Capitol. Ryan glanced at the partial license plate, then back at the bulletin displayed on the computer mounted inside his patrol vehicle. The similarities immediately caught his attention. Without realizing it, certainty quietly replaced patience. Behind the wheel of the sport utility vehicle sat Vanessa Brooks, an African-American woman dressed in a simple navy business suit with a neatly organized leather portfolio resting on the passenger seat beside her. Her hands remained steady on the steering wheel while soft instrumental music played quietly through the speakers. She checked the dashboard clock only once before returning her attention to the road ahead. In less than an hour, she was expected inside the United States District Courthouse to assist with an important federal hearing that had taken months to prepare. Every document she needed had been carefully organized before sunrise, and every minute of her schedule had been planned with precision. She noticed the marked patrol vehicle entering the lane behind her but showed no sign of concern. Ryan continued following for another mile, watching every ordinary movement through the windshield of his cruiser. Vanessa maintained the speed limit. She signaled before changing lanes. She kept a safe following distance from every vehicle around her. To any objective observer, her driving reflected patience and responsibility. Yet Ryan viewed each careful decision through the filter of an assumption he had already accepted. Calm became suspicious. Confidence became unusual. Professional composure became something he believed needed to be questioned. He reached toward the control panel beside the steering wheel, activated the emergency lights, and watched blue reflections dance across the rear window of the sport utility vehicle. Vanessa immediately acknowledged the signal, activated her turn indicator, reduced her speed gradually, and guided the vehicle safely onto the wide shoulder without hesitation. Gravel shifted gently beneath the tires as the vehicle rolled to a smooth stop beneath a clear Virginia sky. She lowered the driver's side window halfway, placed both hands calmly on the steering wheel where they could easily be seen, and quietly waited. Several passing drivers slowed slightly before continuing toward the city, curious only for a brief moment before disappearing beyond the next curve. Ryan stepped out of his patrol vehicle believing he had just found the driver connected to a stolen sport utility vehicle. Vanessa remained seated with remarkable composure, fully aware that some journeys begin with confidence while others begin with misunderstanding, and neither of them realized that before the morning reached its end, the truth waiting just a few miles ahead would completely rewrite the story they both believed had already begun. The crisp autumn air drifted gently across the shoulder of Interstate 495 as Officer Ryan Mitchell adjusted the radio on his shoulder and approached the driver's side of the black sport utility vehicle with measured confidence. His patrol vehicle remained several yards behind with blue emergency lights flashing steadily against the polished paint of the SUV, creating bright reflections that caught the attention of passing commuters before disappearing into the morning traffic. Vanessa Brooks remained exactly where she had been from the moment she stopped. Both hands rested calmly on the steering wheel, her posture relaxed, her breathing steady, and her expression composed. She looked toward the approaching officer with quiet patience rather than concern, as though she understood that every conversation carried the opportunity for either misunderstanding or understanding depending on the choices people made. Ryan stopped beside the open driver's window and offered only a brief greeting before moving directly to business. "Good morning, ma'am. May I please see your driver's license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance?" His tone remained professional, yet there was already an unmistakable certainty beneath his words. Vanessa nodded politely. "Of course, officer." She moved slowly, carefully reaching into her purse before retrieving her driver's license. She then opened the center console and removed a neatly organized registration folder without making any sudden movements. Every action reflected cooperation, transparency, and respect. Ryan accepted the documents with a short nod but did not examine them immediately. Instead, his eyes wandered through the interior of the vehicle. The leather seats appeared spotless. A leather portfolio rested securely on the passenger seat beside a closed notebook and a stainless steel travel mug. A neatly folded blazer lay across the rear seat beside a government-issued laptop case. Everything inside suggested organization and professionalism, yet instead of reducing his suspicion, the orderly appearance seemed only to reinforce the conclusion he had already formed. He finally lowered his eyes toward the driver's license and registration. The names matched perfectly. Vanessa Brooks appeared as both the registered operator and the authorized user of the vehicle. Ryan frowned slightly. The documents looked legitimate, but the incomplete bulletin continued shaping his thinking. "How long have you had this vehicle?" he asked. Vanessa answered calmly. "It was assigned to me several months ago." Ryan looked up. "Assigned?" She gave a small nod. "Yes, sir." She offered nothing further. The short answer left enough uncertainty for Ryan to continue believing there was more to the story. He stepped back toward his patrol vehicle carrying the documents while Vanessa quietly returned both hands to the steering wheel. Inside the cruiser, Ryan entered the registration information into the mobile computer and requested additional verification through dispatch. A few seconds later, the dispatcher answered. "Officer Mitchell, we are still waiting for synchronization between state and federal databases following overnight maintenance. Some records are temporarily delayed." Ryan thanked dispatch, but the explanation did little to change his thinking. Through the windshield, he watched Vanessa glance briefly toward the clock displayed on her dashboard before looking back at the open highway. She never reached for her phone. She never appeared impatient. She simply waited. Several miles behind them, unnoticed by Ryan, 3 dark government vehicles entered the interstate in disciplined formation, moving steadily toward the same destination while carrying information that would soon replace assumption with fact and completely transform the quiet roadside encounter unfolding beneath the clear Virginia sky. The steady rhythm of passing traffic continued as the morning sun climbed higher above the interstate, casting long reflections across the black sport utility vehicle and the patrol cruiser parked behind it. Officer Ryan Mitchell remained inside his vehicle, studying the information displayed on the mobile computer terminal while refreshing the incomplete registration records more than once. Every time the loading symbol appeared, his confidence remained unchanged. The regional bulletin describing a black luxury sport utility vehicle still echoed in his thoughts, and the temporary delay in the state and federal databases only convinced him that his instincts had been correct from the beginning. He stepped out once again carrying Vanessa Brooks's driver's license and registration folder before walking back toward the driver's side window. Vanessa remained seated exactly where she had been since the stop began. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, her posture relaxed, and her expression reflected remarkable patience rather than frustration. She looked toward the officer with the same composed professionalism she had displayed from the very beginning. Ryan stopped beside the window. "The registration is taking longer than expected to verify," he explained. "Until I receive confirmation, I need you to remain here." Vanessa answered politely. "I understand, officer." There was no complaint in her voice, no sign of irritation, and no attempt to challenge his authority. Her calm response seemed almost unexpected. Ryan had prepared himself for disagreement or impatience, yet she offered neither. Instead, she briefly glanced toward the digital clock on the dashboard before returning her attention to the highway stretching into the distance. Ryan noticed the movement immediately. "Are you expected somewhere this morning?" he asked. Vanessa smiled faintly. "Yes, I am." "Important appointment?" Ryan continued. She nodded once. Very important. Would you mind telling me where you are headed? Vanessa paused briefly before answering. Downtown Washington for official business. Her reply was honest, but it revealed only what was necessary. Ryan studied her face carefully, searching for uncertainty that never appeared. He glanced through the interior of the vehicle once more. The leather portfolio remained unopened on the passenger seat beside a notebook filled with neatly organized documents. The government-issued laptop case rested securely behind the front seats. Everything suggested careful preparation, yet Ryan interpreted the orderly appearance through assumptions that had already shaped his thinking. Across the highway, the distant sound of several engines blended together as three dark government sport utility vehicles became visible far behind the traffic stop. They traveled in disciplined formation, maintaining equal spacing while moving steadily toward Alexandria. Vanessa quietly noticed them in her rearview mirror. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly before returning to its usual calm. She offered no explanation and made no attempt to draw attention to them. Ryan followed her brief glance toward the mirror but dismissed it almost immediately. To him, they were simply more commuters entering another busy workday around the nation's capital. His shoulder radio crackled softly. Dispatch returned with another update. Officer Mitchell, synchronization is still incomplete. Federal records remain temporarily unavailable. Ryan acknowledged the transmission before clipping the radio back into place. The continued delay strengthened his confidence that extending the stop was the responsible decision. Vanessa accepted the situation without argument, resting both hands once again on the steering wheel while the convoy continued closing the distance. Neither of them spoke as sunlight reflected across the quiet highway, and neither realized that every unanswered question surrounding the stop was now traveling steadily toward them inside three government vehicles carrying the truth that would soon replace every assumption with undeniable fact. The three dark government sport utility vehicles continued moving steadily along the interstate until the lead vehicle activated its turn signal and eased onto the shoulders several hundred feet behind the traffic stop. One after another, the remaining vehicles followed with precise spacing, their movements calm, deliberate, and perfectly coordinated. Officer Ryan Mitchell immediately noticed the unusual convoy and instinctively stepped away from Vanessa Brooks's vehicle to get a clearer view. Passing traffic slowed briefly as curious drivers glanced toward the growing line of official vehicles before continuing toward Washington. The autumn breeze carried the faint sound of closing doors as several professionally dressed men and women stepped from the convoy. None wore tactical equipment or displayed urgency. Dark business suits, polished shoes, discreet communication earpieces, and leather document folders suggested something very different from an emergency response. Their attention remained focused on Vanessa's vehicle. Ryan reached for the radio attached to his shoulder. Dispatch, I now have multiple government vehicles stopping at my location. Can you confirm whether additional units were assigned here? A brief silence followed before the dispatcher answered. Negative, Officer Mitchell. No local or state units have been dispatched to your location. Ryan thanked dispatch but remained puzzled. The lead official, a distinguished man with silver hair and a composed expression, began walking calmly toward the traffic stop accompanied by two colleagues. There was no rush in their pace, only quiet confidence. Ryan positioned himself between the approaching group and Vanessa's vehicle. Good morning, he called professionally. Can I help you? The silver-haired man acknowledged him with a courteous nod. Good morning, officer. His voice was calm and respectful. We are looking for Counselor Brooks. Ryan hesitated for a moment. Counselor? The man smiled politely. Yes. Before Ryan could ask another question, Vanessa quietly opened the driver's door and stepped onto the shoulder with slow, deliberate movements. She adjusted her navy blazer, retrieved the leather portfolio from the passenger seat, and closed the door gently behind her. The cool breeze moved softly through her natural curls as she stood comfortably beside the vehicle, displaying the same calm confidence she had maintained since the beginning of the stop. The silver-haired official walked directly toward her, extending his hand with genuine warmth. Good morning, Counselor Brooks, he said. The United States Attorney's Office has been waiting for you. The judge asked us to make sure everything was all right when we learned there had been an unexpected delay. Vanessa returned the handshake with a professional smile. Thank you. I appreciate you coming. Ryan stood motionless, trying to understand what he had just heard. He looked from Vanessa to the officials and then back again. Every assumption that had seemed so certain only minutes earlier began quietly unraveling. One of the accompanying attorneys opened a leather briefcase and removed an official credential wallet bearing the seal of the United States Department of Justice. The silver-haired official presented the identification to Ryan with complete courtesy. I am United States Attorney David Reynolds, he explained. Counselor Vanessa Brooks serves as federal attorney on today's hearing involving a multi-agency financial crime prosecution. The vehicle she is operating is federally assigned for official government travel. Ryan accepted the credential carefully, studying every detail beneath the bright Virginia sunlight. The gold Department of Justice seal reflected clearly before his eyes. At that exact moment, his patrol radio crackled once again as dispatch announced that federal database synchronization had finally completed. The timing could not have been more precise. The truth that technology had delayed had now arrived in person, standing quietly on the shoulder of an ordinary highway where assumptions had reached the scene long before the facts ever did. For several quiet moments, only the sound of passing traffic filled the air. Officer Ryan Mitchell looked from the Department of Justice credential to the registration documents still resting in his hands, then back toward Vanessa Brooks. Everything that had appeared uncertain only minutes earlier now fit together with complete clarity. Before he could speak, his shoulder radio crackled once again. Officer Mitchell, dispatch updating your previous inquiry. State and federal systems have completed synchronization. The black sport utility vehicle is confirmed as federally assigned for official government use. The registration is valid. There are no active theft alerts associated with this vehicle identification number. The earlier bulletin involved a different vehicle with a similar description. Ryan listened quietly before acknowledging the transmission. Copy that, dispatch. His voice carried far less certainty than it had at the beginning of the stop. United States Attorney David Reynolds accepted the credential back from Ryan with professional courtesy before opening a slim leather folder containing official travel authorization documents. Counselor Brooks is scheduled to appear before the United States District Court this morning, he explained calmly. Today's hearing involves a multi-agency financial crime prosecution that has been in preparation for several months. We became concerned when she stopped responding to scheduled arrival updates, so we came to verify that everything was all right. Ryan reviewed the documents carefully. Every page carried official government markings, signatures, and matching vehicle information. There was nothing inconsistent about any of it. The facts now stood clearly before him, replacing every assumption that had shaped the encounter. Vanessa remained composed throughout the exchange, never interrupting and never attempting to embarrass the officer. She simply waited until he had finished examining every document. Finally, Ryan returned her driver's license and registration folder with both hands. Counselor Brooks, he said sincerely, thank you for your patience. I should have waited for complete verification before allowing incomplete information to influence my judgment. Vanessa accepted the documents with a small, respectful nod. Officer, public safety requires careful attention, she replied gently. Every alert deserves to be taken seriously. The challenge is making sure our conclusions arrive after the facts, not before them. Her words carried no anger and no accusation. Instead, they sounded like advice offered by someone who believed professionalism could always be strengthened through experience. David Reynolds looked toward Ryan with quiet understanding. Database delays occasionally happen when multiple systems synchronize. That is exactly why communication and verification remain essential. Ryan nodded thoughtfully. As he replayed the morning in his mind, he realized that not every conclusion he had reached had come from evidence. Some had come from expectations he had accepted long before the records had finished loading. Behind them, the remaining government vehicles waited quietly along the shoulder, their occupants standing patiently without adding unnecessary pressure to the situation. No one celebrated the misunderstanding. No one criticized the officer publicly. Their only concern was arriving at the courthouse before the hearing began. Vanessa looked briefly toward the dashboard camera inside the patrol vehicle and then toward the body camera attached to Ryan's uniform. "Those cameras record more than conversations," she said softly. "They remind every one of us that professionalism is measured one decision at a time." Ryan followed her gaze toward the cameras and quietly reflected on her words. He returned one final respectful nod before stepping aside. Vanessa entered the sport utility vehicle, while David Reynolds and the other federal attorneys returned to their vehicles. Within moments, the small government convoy merged smoothly back into traffic, continuing toward Washington. Ryan remained standing on the shoulder beneath the clear autumn sky, watching the vehicles disappear into the distance as the lesson he had learned settled far more deeply than any report he would complete later that day. The federal hearing concluded late that afternoon inside the United States District Courthouse in Washington, District of Columbia. Attorneys quietly gathered their files as court staff organized documents and prepared the courtroom for the next case. Outside, the marble steps reflected the warm autumn sunlight while reporters, legal professionals, and government employees moved steadily through the plaza. Vanessa Brooks exited the courthouse carrying the same leather portfolio she had protected throughout the morning. The unexpected traffic stop had delayed her arrival, but thanks to the coordinated efforts of the United States Attorney's Office, the hearing had begun only a few minutes behind schedule. The important legal proceedings moved forward without interruption, and months of careful preparation had achieved exactly what the federal team had hoped. As she walked toward the waiting government vehicle, United States Attorney David Reynolds joined her with a thoughtful smile. "Everything worked out," he said quietly. Vanessa nodded. "Justice usually does when people stay committed to the facts." Reynolds looked toward the busy street before replying. "This morning could have ended very differently." Vanessa paused briefly. "It could have. But professionalism is measured most clearly during difficult moments, not easy ones." Several miles away, Officer Ryan Mitchell returned to his precinct carrying more than paperwork from an ordinary traffic stop. Before beginning another patrol assignment, he requested to review both the dashboard camera recording and the body camera footage from the entire encounter. Alone inside a quiet briefing room, he watched every minute from the beginning without skipping ahead. He noticed details that had escaped him during the stop itself. Vanessa had answered every question respectfully. She had moved carefully whenever asked. She had provided every requested document without hesitation. She had never raised her voice, challenged his authority, or attempted to create conflict. The only thing she consistently demonstrated was patience. When the recording ended, Ryan remained seated for several moments, reflecting on how easily incomplete information had shaped his expectations before complete verification had arrived. The silence inside the room felt different now. It was no longer uncomfortable. It was instructive. A fellow officer entered carrying a stack of reports and noticed the paused video on the monitor. "Everything all right?" he asked. Ryan gave a quiet nod. "Better than all right. I learned something today that every officer should remember." Later that evening, he met briefly with his supervising lieutenant and recommended adding a new discussion to the department's next professional development session. Rather than focusing only on procedures, he wanted deputies to examine how assumptions could quietly influence decision-making whenever information remained incomplete. His supervisor listened carefully before agreeing that the experience deserved to become part of future training. Across the city, Vanessa looked out the window of the government vehicle as the skyline slowly disappeared behind rows of autumn trees, glowing beneath the setting sun. The day had been longer than expected, yet she felt grateful that the outcome had become an opportunity for growth instead of resentment. She quietly reflected on the lesson the morning had offered. Every badge carries authority. Every courtroom carries responsibility. Every profession carries public trust. But none of those things matter unless people choose to place truth before assumption and fairness before judgment. As evening settled across Virginia and Washington, another ordinary workday came to an end, leaving behind a reminder that the strongest foundation of justice is not found in power alone, but in the willingness to let facts speak before conclusions ever do. The following week, The morning briefing room at the precinct felt noticeably different from the routine gatherings Officer Ryan Mitchell had attended for years. Instead of beginning with patrol assignments and traffic updates, the supervising lieutenant dimmed the lights and displayed a single sentence across the large presentation screen. Verify first. Conclude second. The room fell quiet as deputies settled into their seats with notebooks open, expecting another procedural review. Ryan stood near the front holding a small folder containing the reports from the roadside encounter that had changed his perspective only days earlier. He had volunteered to speak, not because anyone required it, but because he believed the lesson belonged to every officer who wore the same uniform. He described the sequence of events exactly as they had occurred, carefully separating verified facts from the assumptions he had unknowingly accepted before the evidence was complete. He explained how the regional alert, the delayed database synchronization, and his confidence in his own first impression had combined to shape decisions that should have waited for full verification. No one interrupted him. The room remained silent because every deputy understood that the discussion was not about criticism. It was about growth. Ryan then played selected portions of the dashboard camera recording and the body camera footage. Each clip showed the same pattern. Vanessa Brooks remained respectful. She answered every question calmly. She followed every instruction without hesitation. She displayed patience during every delay while maintaining complete professionalism. Watching the encounter from beginning to end without the pressure of the roadside environment allowed everyone to notice details that had been easy to overlook in real time. One young deputy quietly raised his hand. If we had known who she was from the beginning, everything would have been different. Ryan looked toward him thoughtfully before answering. That is exactly the point. We should not need someone's title before deciding to treat them professionally. The lieutenant nodded in agreement. Several deputies wrote the sentence into their notebooks without another word. Later that afternoon, inside the United States Attorney's office, Vanessa Brooks attended a meeting reviewing recent coordination between federal, state, and local agencies. Rather than discussing the misunderstanding itself, the conversation focused on improving communication whenever government-issued vehicles traveled under time-sensitive assignments. Vanessa recommended expanding shared notification procedures during active federal operations so local officers would receive more accurate information whenever technology experienced synchronization delays. The proposal was received with immediate support because it focused entirely on strengthening cooperation rather than assigning blame. United States Attorney David Reynolds smiled as the discussion concluded. Good systems improve because good people are willing to learn. Vanessa gathered her files before replying. Justice becomes stronger every time people choose improvement over pride. That afternoon, Ryan received a copy of the updated interagency communication recommendations through official channels. Reading the memorandum, he realized that the unexpected traffic stop had quietly influenced procedures extending far beyond his own department. A single morning on the shoulder of a Virginia highway had encouraged conversations between agencies that might help prevent similar misunderstandings in the future. As he prepared for another patrol shift beneath the clear autumn sky, Ryan looked briefly toward the dashboard camera mounted inside his cruiser before starting the engine. He no longer saw it simply as a recording device. He saw it as a silent reminder that every encounter deserved patience, every person deserved fairness, and every conclusion deserved to wait until the truth had finally arrived. Nearly 3 months passed before the lesson returned in a way neither Officer Ryan Mitchell nor Vanessa Brooks could have predicted. The leaves that had once covered the highways of Northern Virginia had given way to the first signs of winter, and another regional law enforcement conference brought together representatives from local departments, federal agencies, prosecutors, and investigators committed to strengthening cooperation across jurisdictions. The conference focused on communication, public trust, and the responsibility shared by every professional working within the justice system. Among the scheduled speakers was Vanessa Brooks, invited to discuss interagency coordination during complex federal prosecutions. Ryan attended as part of a delegation from his department, taking a seat near the back of the conference hall with several fellow officers. As the lights dimmed and the presentation began, Vanessa stepped confidently onto the stage carrying the same leather portfolio that had accompanied her throughout countless court appearances. She thanked the organizers before speaking about the importance of accurate information, respectful communication, and disciplined decision-making. She never mentioned the roadside encounter directly. Instead, she described how misunderstandings often begin when incomplete information meets complete confidence. Every sentence reflected experience rather than criticism. Every example emphasized cooperation instead of blame. Around the room, officers, attorneys, investigators, and supervisors listened carefully, recognizing that her message extended far beyond any single profession. When the presentation concluded, thoughtful applause filled the conference hall. During a short break, several young officers approached Vanessa to thank her for sharing practical lessons that could strengthen both investigations and community trust. One officer quietly asked how she had remained so calm during difficult situations involving misunderstanding. Vanessa smiled gently before answering. "The truth usually arrives on its own. My responsibility is deciding what kind of person I will be while waiting for it." Across the room, Ryan heard those words and quietly reflected on how accurately they described the morning that had changed his own career. Later that afternoon, conference organizers invited several speakers to participate in a panel discussion about professional accountability. Ryan accepted the invitation with humility. Standing beside prosecutors, investigators, and agency leaders, he shared the same lesson he had repeated during training sessions at his department. "Experience is valuable," he told the audience, "but experience should never become a substitute for verification. Every person deserves the same professionalism before we know who they are as they deserve after we discover their credentials." The audience responded with quiet agreement because the statement reflected a principle larger than any individual story. After the conference ended, Vanessa and Ryan met briefly near the entrance of the convention center, beneath the American flag waving gently in the cold afternoon breeze. They exchanged a respectful handshake, no longer connected by misunderstanding, but by a shared commitment to improving the institutions they represented. "It is good to see you again," Ryan said sincerely. Vanessa smiled warmly. Progress usually begins with honest reflection. They wished each other safe travels before walking towards separate parking areas, each returning to different responsibilities, yet carrying the same purpose. Behind them, hundreds of law enforcement professionals departed with notebooks filled with ideas, renewed perspective, and a deeper appreciation that justice depends not only on laws and procedures, but also on the daily choices made by ordinary people determined to place fairness above assumption, patience above pride, and truth above every first impression. Spring arrived quietly across northern Virginia, bringing clear skies, fresh green trees, and the steady rhythm of another season filled with ordinary journeys that often carried extraordinary lessons. Nearly a year had passed since the unexpected roadside encounter that had brought Officer Ryan Mitchell and federal attorney Vanessa Brooks together under circumstances neither of them had anticipated. Time had moved forward, investigations had been completed, courtrooms had welcomed new cases, and highways continued carrying thousands of travelers every day. Yet one simple lesson remained unchanged. At the precinct, Ryan had become known not for the mistake that once challenged his confidence, but for the professionalism that grew from it. New officers quickly noticed that every traffic stop he conducted began the same way, with patience before judgment and questions before conclusions. During field training, he often reminded younger officers that the badge represented responsibility before authority. "Facts deserve the first opportunity to speak," he would say. "Our opinions can always wait." Those words gradually became part of the department's daily culture, quietly repeated by deputies who had never even witnessed the original encounter. Across the Potomac River, Vanessa Brooks continued serving as a federal attorney, representing the public with the same calm discipline that had defined every moment of that autumn morning. She remained respected not because of her title alone, but because every person who worked beside her understood that professionalism meant treating every individual with dignity regardless of circumstance. One afternoon, she received a handwritten note from a young law student who had attended the regional conference months earlier. The letter explained that hearing her speak about patience, fairness, and truth had inspired a career dedicated to public service. Vanessa folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the same leather portfolio she had carried for years, smiling quietly at the reminder that small moments often created the greatest change. Later that week, representatives from local police departments, federal agencies, and legal offices gathered for another community partnership event. Families, students, officers, prosecutors, and civic leaders filled the town square beneath bright blue skies, speaking openly about trust, service, and cooperation. Ryan and Vanessa crossed paths once again while greeting visitors at neighboring information tables. There were no cameras focused on them, no headlines waiting to be written, and no audience expecting dramatic words. Ryan smiled warmly before extending his hand. "Good to see you again, counselor." Vanessa returned the handshake with the same quiet grace she had shown from the beginning. "Good to see you too, officer." They spoke briefly about the progress made between local departments and federal agencies, grateful that one misunderstanding had become an opportunity for stronger communication rather than lasting division. As the afternoon sun slowly settled across the community, children laughed nearby, families visited patrol vehicles, and citizens spoke comfortably with the public servants standing before them. It was an ordinary day, exactly the kind of day every community hopes to experience. Before leaving, Vanessa looked toward the crowd and spoke softly, almost as if reminding herself as much as anyone listening. Justice begins long before a courtroom. It begins with the decision to see the person before the assumption. Ryan nodded in quiet agreement. As they walked toward separate paths beneath the same evening sky, both understood that the most meaningful victories are rarely measured by applause, promotions, or recognition. They are measured by the lives improved through wisdom, the trust earned through integrity, and the courage to let truth arrive before judgment. Because a uniform may symbolize service, a courtroom may symbolize justice, and a title may symbolize responsibility, but character remains the only thing that gives those symbols lasting meaning. And in the end, the strongest form of justice is not the power to accuse, but the wisdom to understand before deciding who someone truly is.